686 milliseconds, which is a little sad, and we probably should look at that. But the thing about hard real-time systems is a lot of them, we realise, don't actually shut down and don't delete things. A lot of them, you start them up, and then they just start running until the power goes off or they crash. But it's not going to crash because we've proven that the kernel doesn't crash. So basically, you don't need to worry about deletion. So if we take deletion out of the picture, then we get these results, which unfortunately aren't much better. Again, 630. Digging into what this was, so the case without deletion, the next bottleneck that we hit in SEL4 arises because of an optimization called lazy scheduling. Lazy scheduling is common in microkernels. The idea behind lazy scheduling is if a thread is running and then has to block on something, normally you would take it off the run queue. But in a microkernel-based design, a lot of the time the thread will become runnable again before we need to look at the run queue. And in doing so, you don't need to, you waste a lot of CPU time taking something off the run queue and putting it back on again. So the idea behind lazy scheduling is you can just leave it there on the hope that it will become runnable again soon. But if you're a malicious user executing on a hard real-time platform, you could actually construct this scenario where you have a whole bunch of threads which are runnable, maybe create 100,000 of them, have them all runnable on the run queue, and then go and suspend all of them. And when the scheduler has to hit the run queue again, you get this 635 millisecond delay. So clearly this isn't acceptable for a hard real-time system either. So this is something we're also looking at removing from SEL4. And so you might be asking, that's the blue bars, what are the green bars? The green bars are where we've taken the scenario that was predicted by the execution tool and tried to reconstruct that on hardware ourselves. So the first one is this endpoint deletion case. We've tried to reconstruct that exact scenario on the hardware, and this was the best we could come up with, was 155 milliseconds. And similarly for the deletion case, we could actually get a worse case than previously. So clearly, this upper bound we still claim is valid, but the case that corresponds to it is actually has a smaller degree of pessimism than the other case. So, next stop, remove lazy scheduling. It's clearly not an optimization that's suitable for hard real-time systems, because this can happen. So we got rid of that, and this was the result. Let's just zoom in on that. There we go. It's about a factor of 600 or so smaller. And the deadline we got is 1.2-ish milliseconds. And this is far more acceptable for a hard real-time system. Bearing in mind that this is also on a system with the data cache turned off. If you had data caches turned on, these would drop by, I'd say, at least a factor of 5 to 10. So these results actually make it much more viable to do so. And digging in, the case that causes this is just a communications message, just transferring messages between two threads. The longest message you can send with all the bells and whistles that SEL4 will let you send. And so this is showing that with this platform we could potentially construct real hard protected real-time systems. So we're looking at the future to actually incorporate data caches. The other thing about SEL4 is we have this formal proof that the C code corresponds to specification. And this formal proof has something like hundreds of thousands of lines of proof text. And this isn't used by the C code at all, but the proof does have a lot more knowledge about the inner workings of SEL4 and various invariants on the code, which you wouldn't be able to ascertain from looking at the code itself. So what we're looking at in the future is how can we use this knowledge and the proof to better refine our estimates of what the execution time is. And finally, fix SEL4. There are a couple of loops in there which iterate over all threads, they shouldn't, and that's on the future roadmap, which we're working with the SEL4 developers for. More or less the end of my talk. We believe that protected hard real-time is possible. Until now, the biggest hold-up has been finding a platform on which you can actually give safe hard real-time guarantees, and this is a platform that we believe is possible to do so. If you're interested, you're welcome. Please read the paper or come find me during coffee break or lunch or dinner. Are there any questions?
So there is clearly one question.
Actually, my question is one of your future work.
Yes.
I saw you have disabled this cache and the launch predictor. So I was wondering if the core system performance was affected by disabling that kind of.
As in the analysis time?
Yeah, I mean for the core system performance.
So I think the question is, how does turning data caches and branch predictor on affect the worst case system performance?
Yeah.
So we have done some analysis with the data caches on, and all the worst case execution time guarantees all go down. You would expect that some might stay the same, but our analysis show that the numbers do decrease, so the system performance gets better.
Yeah, fantastic.
More questions? So I have one question if nobody else asks. So you mentioned there were a couple of features in the kernel. You mentioned there were a couple of features in the kernel that you could remove. And would that have any effect on proving the kernel correct?
Yes. So every change to the kernel does require re-verification. The trick is finding the right semantics to actually use to make it easy to verify. In the construction of the kernel, one of the most complicated operations was actually deletion. And we've gotten rid of unbounded deletion and proven the kernel correct with that. But there's still a couple of other deletion scenarios which still have this issue. So we do need to make the changes accounting for the fact we need to verify it.
So we have the gap between the observed and also the imputed defensive. I do compute the worst case, right?
Yes.
So do you understand why was the causing the gap?
I'm glad you asked. I forgot to mention that. The difference here arises for at least two reasons. One is that because the Cortex-A is such a complicated processor, there's a lot of hidden state inside it in the pipeline, the dual issue pipeline, which is very difficult to model. And similarly, the instruction cache has a random replacement policy, which is very difficult to model accurately. You can make coarse abstractions which are still safe and sound, but introduce a fair degree of pessimism. And those two issues are one is what we believe to be the big difference between those two. So the estimates here are, we believe, as close as you can get on this hardware. With more predictable hardware, you get much tighter bounds.
If there are no more questions, did you have another question? Yeah, please.
So right now it's just accumulating memory. If you include flash, for instance, the storage, how would that change?
So the microkernel only has a very small TCB. It knows nothing of flash or device drivers or anything of the sort except the timer. So the analysis only works because the kernel is so small. As soon as you start trying to introduce other features into the scenario,
It gets harder, I would even.
The equation solving portion is super exponential. And the analysis here already takes about 1 or 2 hours to compute. And the super exponential rates have just becomes infeasible.
Thank the speaker again.